computer. Okay, did you start?
Yeah, we started. Hello. Okay. Oh yeah, people are coming in the room. Hi, everybody. Daisy. It's so fun seeing people that you know on these calls. If you are here, please feel free to tell us who you are and what organization you're with. We love knowing who's here in the room with us. We're going to start in just a, oh, Savannah. I know so many people here. Oh my gosh. Okay. We are going to give it just another minute as people are entering the room. It's so great to see everybody. This is a really important dogs and data because we're talking about the thing that probably could change everything. Foster is probably the single greatest tool we have right now, and it's not being fully utilized by the vast majority of organizations. So what we're talking about today is really important. I want to turn it over to Deb Fair from Pedigree Foundation to welcome everyone.
Hi, everyone. As Kristen introduced me, I'm Deb Fair with Pedigree Foundation, and we're super excited about this sixth in a series of Dogs and Data, where we're looking at insights that help drive some shifts and changes, and for shelters and rescues across the country, some of the things that we might be able to do to make a difference. And so one of the topics that we're talking about today is foster, and it's one of the things that Pedigree Foundation is very, very focused on. It's one of our strategic giving pillars as part of our grants initiatives. So great group of panelists that are here today to talk about some possible solutions that you can all look into and operationalize in your function. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie right now, who's got some data and insight for you all.
Great. Thanks, Deb. So we have pulled some recent data that we'll be sharing for the first time on this call. But first, I wanted to just do a quick reminder that we do have our mid-year analysis that is out live. It looks at January through June of this year compared to years all the way back to 2019. And particularly as we're looking at dogs for the first half of this year, we are seeing of all of the dogs who have entered shelters, 56% of them have had an adoption outcome. That's the bottom part of this pie chart on the left. And 4% are still awaiting the outcome, which is our gap. So we have at the top, you can see when we look at all the outcomes, 68% of outcomes dogs were outcome through adoption. But it's really that bottom part of looking at animals coming in and if they've had an outcome or not. And so the 4% gap is really what we're facing from a population standpoint.
Can you wait 1 second? Are you guys having trouble hearing her? Okay, hold on 1 second.
Yeah. Okay, so it's better. Okay, great. So 56% of dogs who have entered shelters have had an adoption outcome. 4% are still awaiting an outcome. You can find this and more on our website. And when we look at adoptions for dogs compared to this year, last year, and pre-pandemic 2019, the dark brown or dark blue you can see for this year is the lowest of those 3 years when it comes to number of dogs that are being adopted. And that solid dark blue line is actual numbers through the first half of the year. And that dotted dark blue line is where we're projected to end if nothing else changes, if we don't have this huge spike of adoptions or some other intervention. So we have some work to do, obviously. And when we look at it by org type, we really broke out what's the likelihood of organizations by org type seeing a decrease or an increase in adoptions, and what is the likelihood of organizations that are really seeing a flat. So at the top, when we look at animal shelters who have a government contract, they are more likely to see a decrease in adoptions than an increase. So 49% of those organizations have seen a decrease in adoptions, probably no surprise. But what is hopeful is that 42% have seen an increase. And as you follow that down by org type, you can see these gaps widen depending on the different organization. So government shelters actually are more likely, more of them have seen an increase in adoptions than a decrease. Where the opposite then is true, we've seen private shelters without a government contract, and then rescues have both seen decreases more likely than not in adoption. So then when we look at foster, we also did a breakout by government or by organization type. And I want to point out, we started collecting this data in 2021 when we released some expanded data for our database. So we don't have anything for January and February that was launched in March. So we only have partial data for 2021, but really the last 3 years, if we look at the first half of the year, the hopeful news is that we have more animals in foster and government shelters than were in any of the last 3 years. So we are making some progress in that, at least for alleviating space, getting pets out of the shelter temporarily, which we'll talk a lot more about these programs as we go. However, the reverse is true for private shelters. We're seeing that trend lower, more to the lower side of the last 3 to 4 years, where there are fewer animals that are in foster than there were in any of the past 4 years. And then also, this is concerning because when you look at organizations that are by design foster organizations, rescue-based, we are seeing fewer of them having animals in their care and through their system than in prior years. The only year that was lower was 2022. So that would make sense for the trend that we saw during the pandemic when fosters filled and that system wasn't moving through as fast as a high volume system. So the number of animals that were able to be fostered through those organizations was pretty stagnant. They were full, but they weren't moving animals through like we needed to for the prior years. Started to see that improve the past couple of years after that, and then we've taken a step back, a pretty significant step back in 2024. Oh, and this is just aggregating everything. So you can see when we combine it all with all org types, 2024 is pretty flat with last year. A little more than 2 years prior, a little, or quite a bit more than 2021, but still a lot of opportunity. Are you gonna tell me?
Okay, so I recently got to present a webinar with Suzanne Kogut of Petco Love, and it was about the unrealized power of foster care. And she shared this calculation that is really compelling, that if 2% more of pet parents fostered a pet, we could totally end preventable euthanasia tomorrow. That really, we know that capacity exists, and we know that 700,000 to 1 million animals are being unnecessarily euthanized every year. We also know that nearly 87 million households own 1 or more pets. And so if 2% of those households, the ones that already own a pet, would just foster 1, we could foster an additional 1.7 million pets, which is far higher than the number of pets being euthanized. And so it's not only the potential to save those lives, but it's also the potential to help animals spend less time in shelter. And I think we want to stop here for a moment, because one of the changes that I think we've seen is that there is in some shelters, there is an increased tolerance for animals living in shelters for long periods of time. An animal shelter, the stress caused to animals when they live in a kennel, in a shelter, every single day their life is on the line. Most of them are in pretty strict confinement conditions. And so what we are going to talk more about today with the experts that we have on the call is the idea that if we put foster at the center of how we operate, that we could totally change how animal sheltering works. Now, I'm gonna give you one quick story, which is that in 1902, Teddy Roosevelt brought together, it was called the Conference on Children, and he issued a proclamation and said that children had a right to be housed in a foster home rather than an orphanage while they waited for a home. And that changed everything in the United States for how homeless children that don't have immediate caregivers are housed. Now, you can say a lot about the US foster system. I think there's much left to be desired, but it was a fundamental shift. And I think we could take lessons learned from the child foster care system and improve animal foster. The problem with foster now is that it's considered a peripheral program in shelters. So most shelters will have 0 or 1 person dedicated to it, but a high volume foster program should be housing as many animals outside the building as they are inside the building. And so for that, having a dedicated team of volunteers or staff to manage foster is how you run a successful foster program. And we know it, nobody's got extra resources lying around right now. What that often means is that everyone in the organization takes on responsibility for being part of the foster program. One quick example of that, that's a shift any of you can make, is that if you just allow your adoption counselors to also place fosters, it's essentially the same process, but for some reason we don't let adoption counselors place foster placements. Totally unnecessary. One other change you can make is just letting your volunteers, signing them up automatically so they're fosters. So when they're in there volunteering, who is most likely to take home your medically, behaviorally challenged animals? It's the volunteers who work with them every day. So we can just automatically sign people up as fosters when they become volunteers. So these are like 2 easy tips anyone can do to move towards a foster-centric model. Now, how did I learn all this stuff? Well, we really believe with shelter animals count and the work that, that I do in other capacities, that data and research have to drive everything we do, because when we guess, we're often wrong. And there is so much compelling data and research behind foster care as the solution to much of what we're dealing with today. So we've brought in speakers who have done the work, have proven that it works, and who are going to share with you some of their expertise today. And it's going to be a little bit different today because we're also going to leave time for questions and discussion. So as each speaker is sharing, we will ask you to save those questions or put them in the Q&A so that as soon as we're done with the speaker introductions, we can get to those. So I'm going to start with Dr. Lisa Gunter, who is my research data hero nerd of foster, and is just completely, when she presents, it's just, there's no question that this should be what we're all doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gunter.
Thanks so much, Kristen. I will take that as a compliment in all aspects, even the nerd part. Thanks. Great. So can you forward the next slide? Because maybe I might have to ask you to do it. Is that okay? Cool. Awesome. So I just want to start off by saying that everything that I'm going to be sharing today is available open access. So these are all the publications that we have published so far. We have another one coming up on week-long fostering, but this is everything that's out there so far, and every single one of these journals is open access. So please feel free, if you want to dive in and get a lot more details than what I'm sharing today, this is where you can find it. Next slide. Awesome, cool. So as you probably saw from that first slide, one of the first questions that we had about fostering in the animal shelter was around temporary fostering. So temporary fostering being 1 or 2 nights out of the shelter. And so that's really where we got our start and trying to understand how such a program worked for the dogs. Because when we started this research, people had different opinions, and some folks thought that, it was great to get more information about the dogs, that they could go out for a night or 2, but others thought that it was perhaps stressful. And I think that that is the awesome sort of ability of data and evidence, is to help guide us from, like Kristen says, perhaps our ideas or our feelings, and have a bit evidence behind them. So initially in our work on temporary fostering, what we found is that dogs' cortisol levels, which is a measure of stress or arousal, decreased in a foster home. And then when they went out as well, they were just resting more. And I think anybody that fosters knows this, that they might come into your house, hang out for a little bit and get settled, and then take the biggest, longest nap you've ever seen. So those are really great way. It's a really great way about how temporary fostering works. And after that work, we decided to ask the same question about brief outings or field trips. And in this work, we found that they did not work the same way, which is again something cool that we were able to learn. And in fact, taking dogs out on a couple hours of a brief outing was in fact stressful for dogs, that it led to increases in cortisol as well as just more arousal. And this is even accounting for their activity. You can read more about that in the paper. But we left the door open on brief outings because we thought, hey, is there just something about them, the way that it increases the dog's social network, that could have perhaps have benefits? And so to answer that question, we carried out another study about brief outings in temporary fostering that was published about maybe a year ago or so. And that is where we found a big bang for your buck with field trips. And we found that when dogs go out on a field trip, they're over 4 times more likely to be adopted than dogs that don't go on field trips. And if you're a dog that goes on a sleepover, it's over 14 times more likely that they'll be adopted. So when we're thinking about these interventions for dogs, when we think about brief outings, I wouldn't think that taking a dog on a field trip is going to let them kind of rest and recharge, because that's not what people do. But if you have a rock star dog that just needs the world to know about them, brief outings are where it's at. And then when we think about temporary fostering of just a couple of nights, that is really the whole kit and caboodle, and you get stress reduction along with much better likelihood of adoption. Cool. Next slide. Awesome. So other things I want to share about what we've learned about temporary fostering and brief outings. And that's it. If you're sending dogs out that are big dogs, send them out with a harness. Give folks the opportunity to have a good outing. We found that when dogs are bigger, they actually have shorter outings. So literally just giving them a harness and making it easier to walk with them is going to help folks just stay out longer, which we know likely means that they'll probably meet someone that might be interested in adoption. Definitely utilize these programs for your long stay dogs.
We hold on one second. I have a question about that. I know people are going to ask, and I think harness is not a harness. So what, like, are there particular harnesses that you recommend? Because I know I have my favorites.
Yeah, I think that when we've been working in our programs recently, we've been using like the 2 hounds design, where they have a clip on the front, they have a clip on the back. And I like the harnesses. I don't love the leashes, but having 2 points of contact is really nice for somebody that maybe doesn't handle a dog very often, and will give them better control.
Those are the freedom harnesses, right? Or any front clip harness. I think the front clip harnesses are different than the...
Yeah, and some of them are better than others, but I think ultimately try to give them some sort of harness that is just a little bit more body control. And ideally, if they have some sort of clip on them that's strategically placed to help with pulling, that would be ideal. And what we're finding is that shelters are using these programs for long stay dogs, which like surprises no one on this call. But the cool thing we found is that shelters were enrolling dogs that had been in the shelter for like a month, and then the dogs go out on these programs, and then their length of stay was comparable to the control dogs. So it is so cool that we can that these kind of programs can have the opportunity to help dogs that have been in the shelter for a while. So I think again, really thinking about the sort of accessibility they can have to the community can go a long way. Bites, they were really so rare. And I know that you might say, yeah, right, they just didn't report them. I mean, maybe so, but I'm okay with 0.2% of the 2,500 experiences that we had in our data set. But don't expect folks to adopt. That's one thing that we've learned kind of over and over, that even our friends at Maui Humane have found the same thing, that if folks go on a brief outing, probably about 4% are going to adopt. If they do temporary fostering, about 12%. But the biggest thing that I can say about brief outing programs, have a public option. Let your community help you. We have found that shelters that have a public option are simply better performing. They send out more dogs. They have more foster caregivers engaged. One more slide. Cool. So
Just
yeah.
explain what having a public option means. I think most people
Oh,
understand that, but what would that look like?
Oh, yeah. So I would say that a public option looks like somebody can walk in off the street and with just a little bit of guidance from you or a little bit of training, handout, etc., they can walk out with a dog and spend some time with it for a couple of hours. Now, you might say, Lisa, the animal behaviorist, how can you possibly say that? And what I'll say is that this doesn't mean this program is for like any dog in your facility could walk out with somebody that is just starting their relationship with your shelter. Instead, we'll give them a rock star. are, somebody and you might only have a few of these dogs that could go out, but heck, if those dogs are going out, 3, 4, 5 dogs are going out every day into your community, that's going to make a really big impact. Cool. All right. So last little bit is during the pandemic, we published a paper about fostering because we were all sitting at home and had really, nothing else to do. So what did we learn from the pandemic and fostering that we can apply now? The first thing is that first-time foster caregivers, highest likelihood of foster fail. So they're 4 times more likely to adopt a dog than a foster caregiver that has a relationship with you. So treat those first-time foster caregivers like trial adopters. They are likely coming from like the same population of folks contemplating ownership, owning a dog. And so don't waste your resources necessarily on training them up. Instead, let them foster a dog that's up for adoption. And if they stick around, then absolutely put in the resources and training them. And the folks that are first-time foster caregivers that don't have a dog, I mean, that's the best chance of foster failure. As probably a lot of folks know on this call, trial adoption programs work. We have a conversion rate of nearly 75%. And the thing is that if it doesn't work out, the dogs don't know, it's just temporary fostering. So they'll come on back and then we'll have more information about them. Again, we're finding that folks, even in these longer term sort of fostering opportunities during the pandemic, folks were typically fostering for about 3 weeks or so, that they don't adopt. But there's likely a relationship that as folks stay, have the dog in their care, that they are probably more likely to adopt. But even at this point, it's less than 20%. 2 last things I just want to end with is that if you are placing dogs, whether it's adoption or foster care, and they have known behavioral concerns, please provide those folks support. What we found is that when dogs with known behavioral concerns go out to foster care, they are 3 times more likely to be returned for behavior than dogs that didn't go out with behavior concerns. So providing folks support and remembering that it's just placement into a house. I think, Kristen, I loved the fact that you said that a counselor could just be doing foster care or adoption, because it's absolutely the same thing. A dog is just going into a house. And lastly, we found in terms of processes that shelters that allowed foster caregivers to do meet and greets, and we said at their house, but just in their proximity, or allow adoption placement straight from the house. So they do the meet and greet, it goes great, and that dog can leave the house from the foster caregiver to its adopter. Those dogs had lower lengths of stay. And again, this is just correlational, so it's kind of our first step in trying to understand that, but it's a pretty promising way that at least for those foster caregivers that really want to help throughout the whole process, they can contribute.
Thank you so much. It's so much information, and I think that people might be surprised too about the risk answers. I hear all the time the concern over risk, which is usually not balanced with the reward of this program, which is a real reduction in risk, right? Because animals aren't going crazy in their kennels, so it's really helpful.
And one of the things I just want to pivot or kind of riff off of what was shared before by Suzanne is that we think about all the folks that can help. And certainly we have, dog owners and pet owners in our communities. But I think through our data, especially through the public option, folks that don't have dogs want to help us too. And they can be part of the success as well. So I think there's a lot of folks in our community that want to help if we let them. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to the Executive Director of Banfield Foundation, VCA Charities, and Blue Pearl. Kim, help me out.
Blue Pearl Cares.
Yeah. Hi, Kim. It's so good to have you here. And you have been such a force for opening up, removing the red tape to foster. And I'm hoping you could tell us a little bit about Dog Day Out and the work that you and your organization have been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hi, everyone. As Kristen mentioned, Kim Van Syoc, and I do run 3 nonprofits. They're all sort of in the family of businesses. But in case I know I've seen some people in here who have received grants from us. It is true. It's all 3. So nothing to be confused about. But this Dogs Day Out is maybe one of my favorite things that I've had the chance to be part of in the many years that I've been doing this work. And Kristen, it's a force, but it's a force because we have other good people around us, like yourself and Finn and Lisa and, you know, our Maui Humane teams and others. So I think what I would love to share is really Dogs Day Out is a field trip based program. I know it is not something that we came up with. In fact, I know Kauai, I saw you on here. They have a great program, Maui Humane. And I think about a year ago, well, it's been a year and a half almost, when I was in Maui, my family and I we took a dog out on a field trip. His name was Jake, and it was really life-changing for me and hopefully for Jake. He is in a home now. And, you know, it's one of those things where I think the phrase is, necessity is the mother of innovation or something along those lines. And this was what it was for me. So when I came back, I went to Kristen and said, look, I think there's only, or Finn would probably know this better with her data, but like maybe there's only like I don't know, 15 or so shelters, good sized shelters that do a significant program around, you know, organized field trips that actually open it to the public, not just pre-approved volunteers or shelter workers. And I said, but it's so great for people who travel a lot, or maybe corporate outings, or when I'm on work travel, you know, I love to see a city by walking and hiking, and I don't want to do it alone if my family's not there. So taking a dog is like a bonus. And so when I came back, you know, we talked about like, what can we do to make this more accessible to everybody? And conveniently, you know, Lisa had some amazing research that came out to back it. So it wasn't just a bunch of feel good. It had, you know, some data to support it, which we know is really important. And, you know, so through VCA charities, because our focus is really about helping pets find and remain in loving homes, but really at the heart of it, it's so much about enrichment and adoption readiness. Because to Kristen's point, like my heart just breaks when we see how many animals just sit in kennels, and it's not just for hours, but for sometimes days and weeks and even longer. I can't even imagine. And that just the mental wear and tear that does on those animals, and obviously on the volunteers and the people that work there. And we also know that shelters have less volunteers and, you know, less resources. So like, what is the win-win for everyone? So all that said, last October, I worked with Kristen and Lisa and Finn and others, and we said, hey, let's put together a pilot program that we don't just want to like make adoptions possible. That's important. But what we want to do is like change it from the inside out. We want to help them have a more sustainable long-term way to engage community members and people who are traveling. And so we did a first pilot class where we brought together 10 of the largest shelters in the US with a collective intake of 250,000 animals annually. And we said, we got buy-in from the top, right? And they said, hey, we're committed to this. Let's train in person 3 days. Let's take dogs out. Let's, you know, sort of workshop it and figure out if this could be successful, you know, on a grander scale than what's happening now, or beyond those of us that are lucky enough to go to Hawaii regularly. And so fast forward, trained our classes in October. Shelters started rolling them out in January. I'm going to give you a few key data points that I think shows how effective this is. But since then, we've now trained 33 shelters as of last Friday. In some of the biggest shelters, again, like New York, Minneapolis, Atlanta, Dallas, Austin, San Diego, Los Angeles, you know, like Nebraska, many places in between. And it's not just private shelters, it's cities. So city of Sacramento and San Bernardino and municipalities. So this has been a really amazing, yay, Nebraska. This has been a really amazing sort of evolution, and it's proved to be really successful. And it just makes my heart happy. So I'll share more of where you can find resources and sign up to be part of an additional upcoming class. But let me just share some data with you really quick. And I wish I had a pretty slide, so just maybe close your eyes and listen to me talk. But Arizona Humane Society. So they were one of the first partners to go live with this program in January, and they have 2,000 new signups for people to take dogs out on a field trip. So 2,000 of those, they've completed 620 field trips with a average of 24 a week. I just had a chat with their head of that program yesterday, and she said, I'm telling you, the minute an opening for a field trip goes out, it's filled within minutes. They're all filled within minutes, and if someone happens to cancel, it's filled within minutes. So that's why we have this robust wait list. But here's the thing. if a dog has pre-field trip, a dog's average stay at the shelter was 41 days. Post field trip, it has gone to 14 days. So 41 days to 14 days. They've also shared that the dogs that have gone out, especially to places like where there's high awareness, as Lisa had mentioned, so festivals or farmers markets or other places, they have an 86% adoption within 3 days. 86% adoption within 3 days, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so that's that. Dallas Animal Services, they've completed 439 field trips. 85% have been adopted or rescued as a result, and 11 went into foster, which is a 90% positive outcome. And it's really cool. They just told me they're working with a high school stats team to like do some really heavy deep dive for them on the data to like dig into it more. So I think that's awesome. Lifeline in Atlanta. They've completed 797 field trips since they rolled their program out, and they've seen a 30% increase in fosters. So also really important as an outcome. And then Barks, so Baltimore Animal Rescue, they've completed 500 field trips with a 96% positive outcome. And that's important because they have shared that that is much higher outcome than dogs that do not go out on field trips at all. So again, I mean, you know, you can see sort of a rinse and repeat here of positive outcomes, which is awesome. But the thing for me that's really important too on this is when I was chatting with Ashley at Arizona Humane yesterday, I wish I could like have bottled up her, like, you know, you can just hear someone's empathy and like heart over the phone. When we were talking about it, she said, I cannot tell you how deeply transformation, I'm going to cry probably. This is my moment. Transformational this program has been for us. She's like, dogs leave here sad, they come back happy. And sorry, everyone, I'm just gonna cry, don't mind me. And she said, the thing is, I see visible differences in behavior from dogs that go out. The quote was, it does wonder for their emotional and mental well-being, not just theirs, but for everyone who works here. Okay, I'm gonna stop crying. The unintended best part of the field trips. So the best part for me, yes, I love that they get adopted or fostered. That is why we did this, but we also did it because honestly, I wanted to improve emotional, mental well-being. I can't imagine in a kennel hoping people see you, hoping people understand that you're a really good dog that is scared and stressed and has to just hope somebody stops for you. And even when I've taken dogs out from there, I took out a dog that I wouldn't have picked. Her name is Blair, sweet dog, tons of drool, not my usual type. And I took her out on a 4-hour field trip, and she actually was adopted by a volunteer at the Botanical Garden at the end of my trip. And then I had to take her back to the shelter so that the woman could come and do a meet and greet. And Blair went back into her kennel, and I'd been with her for 4 hours. And when I walked back into her kennel to look at her while I was waiting, she looked like a dog that had never seen me or a dog that had never been out of her kennel. She was back in the corner. Her ears were back. She was huddled down. And I literally was like, girl, we just spent 4 hours together. You've drooled all over me in my car. Like, how is this the vibe you're giving me? But I just can't even tell you. It was like night and day. And so for me, adoptions, yes, foster, yes, but like, bless all the dogs who just need someone to believe in them for a couple hours. And I'm done. But if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to be part of it, if you'd like to be at one of our in-person trainings, and by the way, we don't just train, but we give you all the supplies to go back and make field trips possible, and then we'll just continue to help support you as you grow it and expand it. Just Google VCA Charities Dog Day Out, or go to our vcacharities.org and look under programs. We also have this really fabulous thank you to Kristen and to Lisa and to Finn and others who helped us do this, but it's a Dog Day Out starter guide. And it's like a very easy, very visual digital version that is really for smaller rescues and shelters who say, hey, I would love to be in person, but I can't leave, you know, for 3 days because, you know, things will fall apart here. So it's a nice way to tiptoe into the concept with data and examples and forms and everything you can imagine. But for those of you that might be interested, Kristen, can you drop something in the chat about where you can sign up to come to one of our next trainings? Because, you know, clearly we're not going to start doing less of this. So Okay. I'm gonna
Thanks
stop
so-
crying. And thank you.
Kim, I think you are amazing. And yeah, I feel that way about this program too. Every time I see the dogs get to leave, and just good dogs that are losing out on a chance at like a loving home because nobody's noticing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the message too to those of you that oversee behaviorists, don't be mad at me for saying this, but if you're heavily investing in shelter behavior, you really should be reconsidering allocating some of those resources to programs like this. Kelly Duer. Well, Kelly, actually, I want to go to you now to talk about what you say about behavior modification in a shelter. I repeat it all the time, your Grand Central Station thing, and I think maybe that's a good way to kick off what you're going to share with us today.
Sure. So imagine it's the 4th of July and you're in DC and it's like 10 minutes to midnight and somebody, and then you find out that all of a sudden the government has put everybody on red alert for terrorism. And at that moment, as you're freaking out, trying to figure out how you're going to get out of there with all these people, someone comes up and is like, "Hey, let me teach you Chinese." And at that moment is like maybe the worst possible time that you could want to or be able to process Chinese, any type of learning. However, if you are in a home, you've had your coffee, you woke up, it's quiet, it's just you and one other person, and they come to teach you Chinese, you have so much more emotional bandwidth to be able to put on it. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that story is so important because I do see people diving into in-shelter behavior versus everything we can to get them on foster field trips. And Kelly, you have been the most steadfast advocate for getting big, whatever, dogs that are just stressed. I think your specialty for now more than a decade has been dogs that are stressed out in shelters and getting them the heck out to foster. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to all of this and the stuff you want to share today?
Sure. So I started out actually in child welfare, working with a program that brought kids from Colombia and Russia to the US, and they would stay for 6 weeks, and it would be ostensibly to be here for summer camp. But what they'd actually do is try and find them an adopter while they were here. And so I was helping coordinate this program in DC. And my husband and I were like, well, we can totally 6 weeks, we can handle 2 kids, whatever. So we signed up and we were like, we're not going to adopt, we're going to just, so these 2 kids come, we immediately fall in love with them. We found them a adopter and a backup adopter and a backup adopter for the backup adopter, and suddenly realized that we could not let them go. And so we ended up adopting them. During the process of getting them, they were in Colombia, so we had to go back and forth several times. I went to the orphanage at one point, and one of the counselors came up to me and he kind of called me to the side and he was like, your son is so good. He is like the kid that the teachers ask, they make an example of him because he does things so well. He's just, he's a natural leader. He follows the rules, but your daughter, she is so bad. And he said she stays up all night. She goes to school. She sleeps through school. She never washes her clothes. She never takes a shower. We're pushing her to do everything. And I was like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. It wasn't the kid that I had seen when they had stayed with us, but we'll figure it out. So we adopt them. And I have to say, Annie was late for school one time in her entire school career. And it was because she was really sick. She was the complete opposite of the child she was in the orphanage. And it was because she was getting what she needed. She had the support that she needed, and she wasn't afraid. A lot of the reason why she stayed up all night was because she was afraid in the orphanage of people, of kids coming in and doing stuff. So having been through that, she also, the reason we got these two kids when they came was because the year before they had come and stayed with another family, and the family had considered adopting them, but they had some concerns about her intelligence. And so they had her tested in Colombia. They had her intelligence tested. Well, the test came back and said she is mentally retarded, or she has a severe cognitive deficit. She will never be able to live on her own. I didn't believe it. I thought, there's something weird with this test. Anyway, we had her tested here. She has a learning disability. She does not have a severe cognitive deficit. Literally, 2 days ago, she came over here and showed me how to give fluids to our really sketchy or really nervous dog. And she's doing amazing. But this test wasn't a measure of how much she knew, the test in Colombia. It was a measure of how much emotionally she had on her shoulders. It just completely changed the results. And so having seen that coming to sheltering, it was easy.
About Annie, that she's also a foster, who's fostered with your family forever, and also is a vet tech now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to mention that because she's that's an important part of the story, that animals actually really helped her too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were a lot of the reason that we ended up adopting, because they came and they were as in love with pets as we were, and it was just like, we're not going to find these kids again in 10 years. And so she was actually the reason that I ended up volunteering at the shelter the first time. And we started fostering almost immediately because Kristen had just started there too. She just started a weekend foster program, and we were like, well, we can totally do weekend. No big deal. So we took home a dog, and it was a dog that her name was Mocha. She was very high energy. She'd been there for 6 months. Her behavior was deteriorating. Annie was at the time an intern, and she heard a couple of staff members talking, and they were like, it's time for her. She's too jumpy mouthy when you walk her and stuff. Anyway, we took her home. She was an amazing, amazing dog. And when we were done with that experience, she got adopted literally like 2 days after she came back to the shelter. I started thinking that we had like some kind of like magic. Like there was like some kind of we had this like crazy weird luck or something. And I was like, our luck is gonna run out, and then we kept short-term fostering, and pets kept getting adopted really soon after we send them back, because we'd have like all information on them. Anyway, long story short, it was not magic. It was short-term foster, and what happens when people get to know the dogs and can tell them who they are.
Kelly, can you just talk a little bit about your work with Maddie's Fund? And I mean, you really are like this. You and Dr. Sagerson and some of the folks on this call are really the people that have driven foster forward for all pets. Can you talk I want to get to Finn, but can you just tell us briefly about your work and also share with us the research that you've gathered on foster? Because I think everybody would really benefit from that resource.
Sure, absolutely. So one of the I do a lot of things mostly focused around foster and increasingly long stay pets. But I help create education, like courses on Maddie's University. I help do consulting. So Sheila and I both have shelters that we talk with on a regular basis, and we're helping to guide and helping to their programs to grow. That is a very large part of what I do. But in working with education and foster, one of the main questions that I always have had is, how do I get my managers, leadership, other staff, community to believe in fostering? How can I get everybody on board? And how can I tell them that this is the right thing to do? So I ended up putting together this document. It is not all what do you call it? Peer-reviewed research. Some of it is research that we did at Maddie's Fund that was not published, but they're links. So it is called Evidence Supported a Home-Based Approach to Pet Sheltering, and it has basic information, but it has links to all of the studies. So that if somebody says, why is it better for these pets to be in foster? You'll have a reason, a bunch of them.
I like how you say home-based approach to animal sheltering. I think that's probably the terminology we need to start using. And there are organizations, KC Pet Project, Lifeline, Pima Animal Care Center, and a few others that have made foster the center of what they do. Austin Pets Alive has been a leader in this area, sending anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 animals a year to foster homes with these are not programs that take resources as much as they take saying yes. And I think that part gets missed a lot, that if you just start saying yes and you stop putting barriers into animals leaving, they start to go to foster. And when they go to foster, it is almost 100% of the time better for the animals and better for the people. And there's nobody that has shown that more than my friend Finn, who's here to talk a little bit about, Finn is one of the funniest people I know, and also like brings this sense of humor to the work and this like real humility around what we're trying to do. And I think like Finn is continuously saying we don't know all the answers, and always kind of asking more questions. So Finn, welcome. It's good to have you, and tell us a little about how you came to foster and about your work.
So we originally, when I got involved, particularly with short-term fostering, I was in marketing at a shelter, and I went to a best friends conference. And I believe it was Kristen that was presenting on short-term foster. And we had one dog at the shelter named Frosty, who was the best dog on the planet. He was a 140-pound white American bulldog that checked all of the boxes, aside from being huge and a breed that is restricted in an area with a lot of rentals. And so I kind of used Frosty as the marketing person, as the gateway drug to introduce short-term foster into the shelter. Can we just start sending Frosty out on doggy day outs? And so we put up a call, will someone take Frosty out? And we got an avalanche of people that were like, I want to spend the afternoon with 140 pounds of American Bulldog. And after months of sitting in the shelter, so we wound up having to send other dogs out too. And I was having a field day with these marketing assets. We wound up having to send other dogs because we were seeing so many great things and we were learning so many great things about Frosty, that we had so much interest that we're like, just shove other dogs at these people, just get them out. And I'm not gonna cry because I'm not a crier, but I think after he had been in the shelter for months, and about 2 weeks after we started sending him out, a woman from Tucson, Arizona, who had been following his story on social media said, I will do anything for that dog. I want that dog, please. And so it was somebody that we knew because she had lived in the area prior. And so I drove down and met her in Tucson, or in Palm Springs, because she was living in Tucson at the time. And Frosty lived to be 14 years old. His name was Sherman. And he had a pool and he had orange trees that he would try to eat the oranges off of. And he lived the rest of his life very happily, less than 2 weeks after we started sending him out. When I moved to Mutual Rescue is a national initiative, and we have two goals. And that is, number one, to increase public engagement with shelters and get more of your community in the door to help. And number two, to bring more corporate money into the sector. Like right now, currently only about 4% of all philanthropy goes to animal welfare and the environment combined. So we're all fighting over these tiny little pieces of pie. So we immediately thought that at that time, this is about 2017, that the best way to do this would be with Doggy Day Out. It solves for both problems. So with the help of some absolutely amazing shelters, Louisville Metro, who had been working with Maddie's Fund, with Fred SPCA, Maui Humane, we put together a toolkit that is just basically blank templates. It's white labeled templates of waivers, of manuals, of everything that smaller shelters, any shelter, could grab, download, put their own logos on, change the verbiage as they need, and it was sort of a program in a box. Since 2017, that has been downloaded, I think we're almost at 4,000 times. And we started putting together a directory of these shelters that were getting programs up. And we currently have 109 shelters in the directory. The other thing we saw was that it was solving for that corporate, getting that new corporate money into the sector as well, because this was a program that was really, really sticky to corporations and to donors that in the past had wanted to do something or some sort of promotion with animal welfare, but had not, the only thing they could really think to do was donate to a national organization where very little of that money filters down to the shelters. So what I've been doing for the past, God knows how many years, I'm real old, I've been in this a long time, is working with shelters to help them start programs and working with corporations to put together national footprints of banks of these shelters that have these programs, and then distributing the funds from those corporations directly to those shelters. So the money is hitting the ground at the shelter level. And we have worked with Backcountry, we have worked with Dutch Brothers, and every donation is a minimum of 5,000 or 10,000 to the shelters. And we've seen these companies that have never come out before for animal welfare move into this sector to do doggy day out promotions. And we've been able to distribute that money to those shelters. And not only that, but we've seen people who the shelter never really had anything to offer them in the past because they couldn't adopt, they weren't trying to give up a pet, they didn't do anything like that, that just would flock to these shelters and not only help the animals, because we all know sheltering is all hands on deck. We need everybody in our community. We've never needed them more. And when we're telling people you can't come in and help unless you can commit to 20 hours a week or you can have a schedule, we are leaving out shift workers. We are leaving out people with children. And now all of those people are in our corner and they're becoming donors and longer term fosters and advocates and all sorts of things. And so we're getting all those hands on deck. And I have deeply loved this program. It has been a passion project for so many years. And I'm very grateful to Kelly because with her help, I started presenting on it, and I present on it multiple times here at different conferences. And it's probably, in my opinion, the miracle drug for sheltering now, that not only solves for the dogs in the shelter, but also solves for how can we get more money to our shelters and how can we get people more involved. And
Thanks,
I didn't cry at the Frosty story. So
I don't think not crying is a good thing, but you know, cool. This is a really uplifting call and one that I think feels really heavy to all of us right now because shelters are in dire straits. And I think people feel like they can't always engage in foster because they're too busy. And that is a mistake. Like if we don't engage in foster, the too busy becomes way too busy and way too crowded. And it is worth investing in. You've heard us talk a lot today about short-term foster, and that's because it is a relatively low risk program. It's easy for shelters to start. It targets those dogs that Kim like so eloquently and like heartbreakingly spoke about, that are the ones that are just tearing me up right now too. Good dogs just stuck in care. And it's getting them adopted, like because even if the person doesn't adopt them, they're their advocate now, like they are advocating for them. So as we bring this call to a close, and gosh, I need to plan these better because I know I promised there would be time for questions, and we're gonna have a recording for you after this, and B, we are gonna get your questions answered. And all the links that we shared here will also send out. But I want to invite everybody on the call to just offer one specific piece of advice to organizations right now. I'll go first. It is every time that you say there's not enough fosters or we can't find anyone to foster, you are only reflecting your own failure to ask, because the community is out there. We have to ask people for help. We have to make it very easy for them to help. if we ask someone to foster and then they have to submit an application and then they have to wait 30 days and come to a training and sign all these forms, that is not asking for help and making it easy. There's nothing more important you can do than cut through that red tape right now and let people show up and foster. If it's not show up and foster, it is too long. And that includes animals with medical challenges and animals that are young. People are just people, and we're just people. Most of us don't have any special magic skills, unlike Kelly, who actually is kind of magic. So, but that would be my advice, is like ask for help every day and make it really easy for people to help when it comes to foster. So I'm gonna bounce around the room because I can see Lisa's already got hers. So Lisa, what's yours? No, you don't?
Oh, I have two short things. One, to bounce off of you, because maybe it's like a hot potato, is make it easy for people to do the right thing. And that is just organizationally, but absolutely your community. So get down those barriers so people can help. And then the last thing, I was inspired by Daisy at Lifeline, and one of the things she said stuck with her when I talk about temporary fostering is when we're trying to, talk about these programs, I often say, would you give up your weekend for the work week? And you wouldn't. You want that opportunity to rest and recharge and go home and face Monday again. And it doesn't make work go away, but we would never give up our weekends. And we need the dogs to be able to have that opportunity too, because we've all talked about how stressful it is to live in the shelter. So just giving them a break, even just for a couple days, is incredibly meaningful. That's all. That's what I got.
Thank you. Kim? We have about 4 minutes, you guys, too. So these are quick.
I'm just going to reiterate actually what Lisa said, which is let's just make doing the right thing easy. And I mean, that is like a motto for life, but definitely for this work, because I mean, just again, like these animals didn't ask for this. They didn't ask to be in this kennel. They didn't ask to be in a, like never get outside. But like my goal, I just want animals to feel grass on their feet and sun on their face and wind in their ears and a day of love. Like, just make it easy.
Thanks, Kim. Finn?
My big thing would be if you're looking at this and saying, no, we can't, or no, I couldn't, or that, my question or my big takeaway for all of you would be really ask yourself why. And if you're looking at this and saying, we can't do this because we tried this once, or the people in our community, if the answer to your no is a story and not data, that's a trauma response.
Oh,
that
good
is not actually a good reason to not do something. When people tell me why they don't want to do something, or if I ask them why and they respond with a story, that usually means we've got to take care of ourselves a little bit better, but we also have to be more data-based because we're all in this together.
That is so good, Finn. I'm writing that one down.
And Kristen, can I just echo to Finn? I know we sometimes get pushback of like legal's not going to like a dog day out program. It's too much risk and liability. And my feedback would be, well, so is, people finding out that dogs haven't left a kennel in over a month, and the fact that puppies are being euthanized at intake. So let's just pick your risk.
Yep. Kelly?
I think the key to a lot of these foster and dog day out is talking about your program, talking about the pets who are going on it, having a process to market the pets from foster homes, and getting that marketing material from doggy day out participants and getting it out there to the world. I'm going to put a link here with some information.
Stephanie?
Yeah, just a quick encouragement. Okay, sorry. A quick encouragement to please submit your foster data into Shelter Animals Count so we can continue to provide better insights to everyone, so we can make those data driven decisions. And just after spending a lot of years in sheltering myself, maybe avoid trying to create problems from the start and trying to solve those individual animal solutions to prove concept before starting big and being told we can't do it at all. Start with that individual animal and see what creative options we have from that, and then build upon that, like some of the panelists mentioned.
Can you mute?
Yep.
Deb?
I cannot I just got to say that I'm so inspired by everyone that was on this panel in this discussion, because as I told you, and Kim, do not make me cry. This is something that Pedigree Foundation considers to be, again, a top priority for us as we look at grant focus. It's an area that we feel is, as everyone said, just keep it simple. It's something that seems to be super easy. I did temporary foster for a vet tech who had to change her apartment location. She had no one to take care of her. She could only take care of one dog, and she had two. And I said, I'll take that second dog. And we kept that dog for 2 weeks, and it helped her so much just to have a way to, keep that dog with her in the long run. So I think and it was relatively easy and super simple to do. So I think it's a huge opportunity. And on behalf of Pedigree Foundation, so proud of the work that everybody's doing here. And I know that a lot of great ideas here to be shared. And like I said, kudos to Kim and the team on Dogs Day Out. All of you that have, invested in this, because I think there's great work to be shared and great work that we can scale up together. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Deb. Thanks everybody so much. I owe you guys one. We are so grateful for you. Stephanie and Deb and I are you all are amazing. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's here, because you're also doing the same work. So we will see you at the next Dogs and Data. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a great rest of your day.